Muito boa tarde. A pergunta que hoje nos traz aqui.
Hello, good afternoon. The question tonight should require just 3 words. Does globalization free you? Yes or no? But 3 words are not enough. And that is because they are not enough that we are going to see 3 people is sufficient to come to that conclusion. And but as important as the conclusion is the process so that we can have our own opinion about this matter. And that is why we are going to listen to our guests. Globalization is usually a word, a term, a concept that we got used to hear often in the economy. Freedom of movement of people, capital, goods, the perfect market economy that will lead to the distribution of wealth, the creation of welfare. It's a matter that makes us think of the economy of globalization. But globalization happens also in many other fronts, so to speak, in our social habits, in our new ways of communicating, culture. But globalization is also a subject that concerns other frontiers. Frontiers in the geographic meaning of the term, the nation-state relationship between safety, defense, attack, and globalization and freedom. That is why we have today these 3 guests, and I will start asking the first question in this debate, the first round. Professor Jorge Braga de Macedo, I welcome you, and he has an answer to this question. Is globalization free or liberate? His answer is based on a chart. Thank you. I will give an empirical answer to this question. Globalization makes you free. And I will use a sample of about 90 countries in 3 decades, and with 3 variables that were used for this. First, the globalization rate used by the Technological Institute in Sweden, including technological and social globalization, for instance, access to internet, communication between people, and the number of embassies. This indicator that have not been used by economists before is quite encompassing. The second variable is freedom. And in the booklet that was given to you on page 6, you find this indicator or index, which combines 2 indicators, human rights and the guarantees of democratic process. And what we have here is whether people are free, not free, or partially free, but it is the value from 1 to 7, 7 being totally free and 1 not free at all. Now, this relation has to be completed with another variable, which is proximity. Proximity here is measured vis-à-vis the technological border. That's the United States, and GDP per head is not very perfect indicator, of course, as any other. So this way of seeing is necessary because if I only look at globalization and freedom, I do not know what causes what. I may find a correlation, but I will not know if there is a cause-effect relationship and if there is a common variable explaining the correlation. So proximity is the distance to technological border. It's the same thing, is precisely that variable. So the answer to the question, I can show it here, give you some time to get used to those colors, is that globalization frees people by bringing them together. So in this sample, the result is quite clear. You look at the y-axis, you see that up to 150, and the top of those dots that have that peak that goes up to the x-axis is the United States with 150. That's over 50% more. Then if you go to the lower left corner, and if you imagine that you go then from there to the right left corner, it is a proportional hike. More globalization, more liberty, more proximity, more globalization, more freedom, more proximity. Now the question here is that the way and the color, the shape and the color of those relationships represented there is quite important. Let me ask you to try to see the projection in the y-axis and in the x-axis, and then you'll see that in the middle of freedom, when freedom is between 3 and 4.5, there is a reversal. We have countries with very little freedom, very little globalization, very distant from the United States. The ratio is positive, and a positive ratio for those that are closer to the United States with more freedom, 6, 7, and with a globalization up to 80 or 90. But in the middle, there's a reversal. So the first exception, there is a sort of reversal in the process. And it's in the BRICS that this happens, funny enough, that this reversal happens, where more globalization and proximity is at the cost of lesser freedom, as we measure that. But there is another aspect that is very important here, color. In green, you have the OECD countries, not just the OECD founding countries, but those that became members because they found that they were more similar to that community of countries that was created in the North Atlantic after the Second World War. So we have Mexico, Korea, Japan was not a founding country but became a member soon after, and then Poland, Hungary, and so forth. Now, I would like you to imagine that there was no green in there, and the ratio, the relation immediately drops. So if it is not for the OECD based on the community of safety that drags the ratio between globalization and freedom and drags it closer to the border, then at the moment we would not have a positive ratio. There is no ratio at all. So the OECD pulls, and this is very important to the subject that we are discussing here tonight because of this community of safety thing. A community of safety is a sharing of multilateral monitoring mechanisms. The OECD countries are regularly examined. The United States are examined by Luxembourg, for instance. The pressure of their peers, those countries accept their policies to be appreciated by other countries. On the other hand, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they believe that that is not acceptable. They will say that there is a mechanism to analyze, managed by IMF in the G20, but that has nothing to do with this. It does not have this more current, common sense thing. And in that part, closer to the left axis, you find African countries, a lot of them. Those also have their own peer evaluation mechanism working since the year 2000. So, both in the poorer countries and the richer countries, there is a sort of an international cooperation. In the richer, it's a community of safety. In the poorer, it is not, but in the middle, there is nothing. And this breaks the vicious circle. So, answer to the question, does globalization free you? Well, in my perspective, from this perspective, yes, it frees you by bringing you closer to others. So, the middle income countries are far away from this rule than the low-income countries, where there is this vicious circle between globalization and freedom. Thank you. Professor Monica Diaz, the question that brought us here today, I think that this answer depends on our capacity and our ability to fulfill globalization, freedom with meaning. Globalization depends on our ability to give meaning. Let me give you an example. A knife is a tool that in the hand of an assassin can be used to cut someone's throat. In the hand of a surgeon it may save lives. And it may also be used for us to peel an apple and share it and taste it afterwards. So globalization is a means, essentially a means, and therefore, as a means to an end, as a tool, we have to say that yes, it is, as a tool, as a means to an end, it may convey some freedom or not. And then we have to go back, because the concept of freedom that has been discussed throughout these 2 days also depends on our ability to significance, to give it life. Freedom is not something which is finished or that can be planned. It has to be monitored, it has to be rebuilt, recreated, animated. And the word animate is important. Anima, soul. So every day, every time, everywhere in the world. So the freedom is about to come, is the future. So we have a great responsibility. Freedom depends on choices, and these choices, freedom can be defined as a possibility to have and to make choices, meaning that we have responsibility. Freedom makes us accountable. So, and we are held accountable because the way we understand freedom will have consequences, and it is incredibly powerful. So, to this extent, it is important to say that if you don't choose, you're making a choice. If you don't think, you're also formulating an hypothesis about freedom. Those that do not make choices give away this possibility to others, and this may lead to dictatorship or to alienation. And these are dangers that in times of globalization are much more complicated and much more blown up. Why globalization? Globalization meant what could be seen as a means to an end, as a tool. What is this tool? What does this mean? What is this road? It's a highway. It is a tool that amplifies incredibly our vision field and our field of action. And so this leads to what we've seen a while ago, the idea of proximity, of coming closer. Sometimes it is not real, though. But it amplifies our scope and field of action, but it also does something interesting. It multiplies the instruments I have to see and act. And this means there is a multiplicity of perspectives that overlap each other. The world in globalization is like several voices, several discourses, and creates in time the sensation of acceleration. Acceleration in time leads to or creates a new notion of synchronicity. And this idea of getting closer to the space and synchronicity in time confuses our orientation, abilities of globalization, all its potential creates confusion, disorientation that then is projected in the very idea of freedom, and the consequence is that today, to be free means to have many more responsibilities, much more responsibilities. It's much more complex to be free today than 100 years ago. Because there have not been enough possibilities for freedom. And I can give you another example. We today on TV, radio, newspaper, the iPod, or mobile phone, we have access to situations of violation or respect for freedom that happens anywhere in the world. We can see at the time when in the moment we can see this raises a new question. What are we going to do about what we have seen? I cannot say that. Like people could say 100 years ago, I did not hack because I did not know, I couldn't see. Now we have knowledge, now we see. And this blowing up of the scope increases our responsibility. And freedom implies this. So freedom frees you up, yes. But this does not mean it is easier, better, or that we are happier. That's a myth. The idea that the freedom brings happiness. It's a mistake. Well, we can be very happy with the freedom we have, but things are not related. So freedom is complex, it's difficult, and so much for the better, because that's what life is all about. To accept difficulties, to find new paths, to fight and search, and in new conditions and with increasingly more sophisticated tools, dare to have hope, dare to be responsible. And, I also like to leave you with a possible solution for this complex nature of globalization.
General, my answer to that question implies the analysis, passes through the analysis of relations between freedom and security, and let us analyze whether there is freedom without safety or security. If we carry out this approach, or rather if we deal with that question based on that viewpoint, the first answer that I give you is that it's been a long time since there's a proliferation of a violent conflict which is as extended as today. Despite not having the world wars or conventional war, all the world is in conflict. And are people affected by these conflicts in freedom? Well, under my viewpoint, it's very difficult that one can say that people who are afraid of dying, unless we consider that dying is a true liberation, they may not want to die. In that case, it's the worst case scenario for the lack of freedom. So this is the very first question. The second question has to do with the globalization of violence. Nowadays, because technological media allows it, it's easier for a violent action is prepared and planned in very far away from the place where it will be carried out, causing a generalized fear, because the information is general, the information is global. The impact on each one of the persons of this globalization is going to take effect, and it's going to disseminate throughout the world. to all people who have access to information. So at first sight, the idea is that I guess that globalization, although this is arguable, of course, the current globalization may have given origin to a greater well-being, but has certainly not originated greater truth. We see that millions of people who have reason to higher levels of well-being are not free. It's enough to look at China, where this phenomena is emerging. So it's very difficult for us to give a clear idea and to say either yes or no. It is easier to relate freedom with security, and my answer is while insecurity increases, and insecurity increases through globalization, nobody really knows what will happen if the regulators of globalization will be others. Those who decide the globalization actions, what are their goals? Are their goals to attain freedom, to attain greater freedom, or do they have other types of goals? And I'm doubts that it's to attain more freedom. Well, this is not the ultimate goal. And in my view, this implies, well, this is explained because those who are in charge of the mechanisms of globalization, well, not the technological mechanisms, because these mechanisms derive from progress, but the technological mechanisms may create walls, may create firewalls, may create parallel internets. So the technological progress does not mean that globalization is a fatality, because globalization is a result of a political will. And to have a globalization in a given way, because the political will can be take into effect globalization with in a different way, with other goals. One of these goals can be freedom. So what you've said in relation to two recent events, one is in fact, as we speak, the Arab Spring, regardless of the opinion we have on its evolutions, happened because of the dissemination of information through social media. Peoples which had not access to free information had access to a great deal of information. In Syria, we've been witnessing executions which have the goal of showing to the whole world an action of blackmail, and this has been discussed in the media on whether media should show these actions or just censor these images, because it's their dissemination that allows to attain the goal they wish to attain, which is to disseminate generalized fear. In view of these two events, and having in mind the way these two information mechanisms are used to attain these goals, who is in charge of the globalization mechanisms? How can we stop? How can we imagine? How can we accelerate this phenomena on behalf of collective freedom? I don't know how to answer this question. I believe that globalization, because of the information, is enabling that all wars consider what we call the main element of combat is information, and the violence is made having the ultimate end of passing on this information. When a group develops an operation, it tapes a television team with operators who record, and the important thing is not whether they're killed more or less. The important are the facts that this footage has globally, or in a smaller arena, if the information has only a very small focus. But information has reached a level of effects that at a given moment, the outcomes are out of control. We are no longer aware of what will happen next. Professor, you'd like to add something? I'd like to mention fear, because when I was getting ready for this discussion, I think that this idea of proximity or closeness, the proximity or the closeness to the GDP of the United States was a better indicator than fear. But a way of looking at things, and closer to what we've been hearing so far, is, does globalization liberate or it threatens? And when I was asked to mention or to choose a book, I mentioned a book by Miriam Leitão. There's a Brazilian writer, which wrote a novel called Extreme Times. She gave very interesting examples of the aspects of globalization in Brazil after the slavery of Brazil in Brazil have been prohibited, and within the same families. In one case, because of the attitude in relation to the future, in one case, it liberated people, and in other cases, it just frightened people. And why did I not follow this initial instinct? Because if you ask, is globalization going to liberate? Well, we don't know. The issue of fear is something which is not, of course, in this index. But the important thing is just to pass on this message of hope and introducing security, not in terms of the state of mind of individuals, but of the relationship between countries. So this is why I've used OECD, but the basis is NATO, the community of the North Atlantic, which was enlarged to all the other countries which became members of the OECD. Of course, there are different viewpoints amongst them. Well, the issue of fear is not in opposition to what is sad, is being sad, because it's always the way of dealing with freedom. And this book, Extreme Measures, points this out. So if globalization makes people closer, it liberates people because it eliminates fear. We're talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech in 1941. He defines the main pillars of freedom: freedom of need, freedom from want, freedom of belief, and freedom from fear. Now, there are reasons for this hope that the professor is talking about. Yes, in particular, if we are not prisoners of impossible expectations. There's a very interesting essay by Isaiah Berlin, who talks about the freedom from fear, but also of hope, in as much as not being able to do anything upon reality, just using our imagination. So we cannot become slaves of a illusory expectation, but fear is equally restrictive. Fear and despair represent the end. So in the Roosevelt speech in this morning, Professor Vital Moreira talked this morning about the first three freedoms, which are very important, and he did not so much talked about the freedom from fear. We have to be able to do what we want, to be able to say what we want to do, always in a context of responsibility. And why is this so important? Because one possible solution would be, for instance, if we look at today's globalization of this issue, does globalization liberate? We have a great example to show how globalization can also release people. And we have civic movements, civil society on a local level, and also the global civil society. And we have many institutions, many small associations, many NGOs, some organizations working together with governments, some others work with companies, and the foundations. We are in a space of freedom. I'd like to say that I'm quite grateful for the fact that I'm here, and I'm very happy for having this possibility of living in this space of freedom. We can talk about Human Rights Watch, which observes, checks whether human rights are kept or infringed in anywhere in the world, both in the federal state of the United States as well as in Bangladesh. We have an organization such as Girl Effect, which helps young girls having access to education, to being able to make their own options. We have associations such as Global Giving that allows that any person who is not willing to engage politically can give a donation for a concrete project with a huge impact at local level. So we can see what is happening in many places of the world, not just when we're talking about conflict or war and peace, but also schools, education, civic participation. So this possibility of denouncing infringements of rights, not just denouncing them, but also criticize them openly, and to start campaigns against them. This is a possibility given by globalization. But are you saying that it's more difficult to be free today than 100 years ago? This is a controversial statement. Yes, true, but because today we are have greater responsibility in terms of participating in these denunciations, in this solidarity, if you will, that is not just local, but practically a global solidarity. But there is a question which is really hard. The issue of globalization, which makes us think in terms of universal ambitions. For instance, I want to defend human rights in very different spaces, but then the respect for ways of living in a given location. But if we think this conflict is 2,500 years, if you read Socrates, you can read it. The heroine of extreme times, it's no doubt that Brazil and ancient Greeks are together. And the issue is that we rule Antigona. It could be the motto of this afternoon. We all have to choose, because if we choose otherwise, we don't know where to go. Reality is there, images are there, information is there, so what can I do? This is where the difficulty lies. This is our dilemma. General, you have the floor. I'd just like to say that we have to start from base on the assumption that freedom is an individual option. Each individual decides, feels whether he's free or not. So this is the issue. It's an individual option. And there may be structures which defend the principles of freedom, but there may be countries where people are not free. We have such an example with Portugal. Until the 25th of April, Portugal was a member of Organization of the Democratic Countries, so supposedly countries where there was freedom, and as a result, we should be free. But that's not true. There were countries when that was not the case. I believe that freedom is very much linked to the ability of benefiting from my own rights. If I can, in any circumstance, use my own rights, just not infringing the limits of mutual respect, of course, I believe that we have freedom. Otherwise, we do not have freedom. There are many cases right now originated by globalization where freedom is not present. Namely, you've mentioned during you mentioned the Arab Spring in China. The words referring to the Arab Spring disappeared from the search engines in China to prevent them following their example. So there are a series of issues which are related with globalization and with those in charge of globalization, be it states, whether it's democratic states. For instance, who's in charge? What you were saying earlier on. Who decided or who raised the possibility, who started the idea of most of the Western companies going to China or to Bangladesh? Who did this and what was the goal behind it? Let me just clarify. These index by Freedom House, which is in your booklet, and the rating from 1 to 7. In 74, Portugal is partially free. Russia is non-free. In 74, Russia is partially free, and then 2014 is again non-free. It's not free. So this is because of follow-up. The data covered 30 years. Each point it were around 3,000 were a combination per country per year, and this is the sum up of a method which looks at these figures like business indicators do. You can't just make the graphic show say what it doesn't. There may be a free country, but there may be a person like fear, a person that doesn't feel free, like Miriam Minch. So I'd just like to send a message which is irrelevant to Portugal, and I'm thankful for you to have mentioned 25th of April. We went from partially free to free. Lusophony. What I'd like to call your attention is that Brazil, lusophony in terms of GDP, is the greatest in GDP, has a lack with collaboration with other countries, which Portugal does not have. Portugal, even a country where it was partially free, it collaborated with OECD, and there were examinations and there were peer pressure. And this is not the case for Brazil. And the 6 African countries which are part of CPLP have the peer review mechanism which works quite well. But the illustrations I'd like to give you, the 2 examples, are here in this lusophone space, because the way of preventing this to be seen as a parochial vision of the country we have. We're all very glad for having this opportunity of talking about freedom in such a free forum, but we have countries which are very similar to ours, and we've had illustrious Brazilian speakers where we can perfectly see that the future of the Portuguese language implies this giant, which is Brazil, besides the African countries. So we have two examples. First, a declaration in Bissau, made at Bissau in 2006 on the development goals. This is very important because it's the single declaration within the United Nations and the associations for culture and language, where they introduce, besides the important element of political will, besides the issue of financial resources given to collaboration, there's another thing which really is very meaningful, which is knowledge. The declaration of the summit, the Bissau Declaration, mentions mutual knowledge, the proximity and not fear, to be able to exchange experiences. The multilateral surveillance is also similar, but it's not just that. So we have a good example. Second example is it's more on the business side, but it's quite relevant because it's not well known. Many people don't pay attention to the Lusophone space because they just say, well, it's just Brazil, but there's an European country over there, a very small country, which was a colonial power once. And several business associations in Portugal have been proposing that we look at the Lusophone space not just in global terms. This idea of the Declaration of the Millennium Goals is just for countries to look similarly based on their common goals, but look at regional platforms. It's just Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, CAAO with Nigeria. It's not just São Tomé and Equatorial Guinea. It's the community of the African states. It's not just Angola, Mozambique, but also SADC. So it shows, and I can give you more examples. The Portuguese companies and the business associations start being aware that globalization can liberate them, can free them in an atmosphere where making business is easier because it's made in Portuguese. Well, but you have to pay attention. The fact that it's a Lusophone space, it doesn't mean to say that it's spoken in Portuguese. Roberta was very Lusophone when he was speaking English as in Portuguese, but I'm calling your attention to this fact because this is closeness. Language makes us closer, and this global Lusophony, the regional platforms of Lusophony, are a message of hope that shows that it's not just a security community, because it would only apply to us because we are the single country amongst those in the OECD. In similarity to the previous panels, we're going to open up to questions. Please raise your arm and just, be as brief as possible so that we can pass the floor to our speakers.
Good afternoon, my name is Luís. I would like to know if we've reached a point in time where globalization has reached its end. Has it gone beyond what we really want it to be, or is it now controlling us? Have we gone too far? The current globalization has created negative effects, negative aspects in terms of freedom, which has to be regulated in a different way. We can't have some stakeholders, some players who are illegitimate sometimes, or sometimes we don't even know who they are. They can't be the ones who write the rules of globalization, and sometimes the economic rules. And sometimes we don't know who these people are, and their aims are not of freeing people, but are other aims. I'm not saying we've reached the end of globalization or that we've gone beyond the benefits of globalization, but major countries or groups of countries who have their own interests, I'm sure they will create firewalls, because the insecurity which the current globalization is leading the will for democratic countries to have relationships with other countries. For example, eavesdropping on telephone calls, and certain world leaders have threatened with changes to the internet. So I believe this globalization may have gone too far. Who is this globalization? We are globalization. To say that globalization has gone too far, it seems like somebody created globalization and represents globalization. In that sense, we have to think that frequently globalization is linked to the World Economic Forum, but it also made possible the Social International Forum. In my opinion, the danger is asking that question, because that makes us non-accountable, saying this globalization has gone too far. What I have to say is that I've gone too far. If I don't agree with the way in which globalization is going, the way in which communication, the media, the governments or civil society are dealing with migrations, mobility, hypercommunication, if I don't agree or if I think it's dangerous, then I can give you an example. I, on the internet, can start writing. I can have a blog. I can write to friends and say, I think we can do things differently. I can I can create an association. Or, very easily, I can pray, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Protestant, Buddhist. We can't we can't ignore the fact that we have a role to play. We can intervene. So that question is dangerous in itself. It's clear from this diagram there's no country which is developed and globalized, but many countries are neither developed nor globalized. And outside the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, there were many countries who couldn't overcome the problem of low income. But I don't believe that not going down the path of globalization will be the solution. Globalization and its relationship with proximity is very important. What we should have is more globalization, because we can't find a solution outside globalization. So the Portuguese-speaking countries dimension, more important than European Union for Portugal, so that we continue to feel Portuguese with all our specificities, but we shouldn't think that we are operating outside a global world. And that's what happened in the past in Portugal. Portugal was close to globalization in the 16th century, in the 19th century as well. And then the elite had a negative idea about the role of Portugal. But when you say that we've gone too far, you're talking about a world that doesn't exist. We have to find a way of globalization bringing people closer together. And there's a problem between cooperation between countries, not cooperation between people. And China, for example, I mentioned Brazil, we could talk about India or Russia. If these countries don't play the rules of cooperation, then that's a much more serious problem than the fact that we have countries with very low GDP. What about in Europe? In Europe, I asked the gentleman from Canada, Europe here is very important. If Europe is open, it's a decisive strength for globalization because they have forms of government which are more open to scrutiny. As we know, we have decisions coming from the European Commission and the European Central Bank which can't be argued. We accepted those decisions. If Portugal becomes an open door for European politics, we are providing a good shining light to everybody. Some time ago, there was a meeting between the German Chancellor and the Portuguese business community and the Prime Minister of Portugal, and both said that Portugal was a opening for Europe. But for the German Chancellor to have said that Europe needs Portugal to open up, that's significant. Maybe, as it was stated by politicians, nobody pays attention, but Portugal has a role of opening up Europe to the world. Isn't Europe closing in Portugal? Isn't it restricting the role of Portugal? Because decisions aren't taken by our parliament, by European institutions. I'm talking about the recent past, the Troika decisions, the austerity adjustment program. Is Portugal free in that context? We're talking about globalization. That's a different kettle of fish. But in the last 3 years, the Portuguese economy has opened up to the world as it never had in the past. So that is clear. The percentage of trade in terms of GDP was the same as Germany 3 or 4 years ago, and that increased. Our ability of attracting major companies to invest in Portugal, even from outside the EU, is accepted by all. I'm not saying that globalization will solve everything, but that Portugal has been a good example, even in these difficult times, with the adjustment program, of opening up. That is a good example of globalization. And it's doing this in coordination with European countries, but also with other countries, namely Portuguese-speaking Portuguese-speaking countries in the world. You mentioned globalization and security and freedom, but nobody talked about the economic aspect, competitiveness, the creation of wealth, and employment and unemployment. What's our place for Portugal in terms of globalization in relation to these issues? I thought I had been clear. In terms of proximity, that variable is very important and has been increasing with democracy and globalization. The number of democracies went up and globalization has also increased. This is a ratio between the GDP of the United States, which went up, and the others. Which this shows is that over the last 40 years, Portugal has created growth in relation to the United States. As regards competitiveness, that's based on my last comment. If we are able, at the end of the day, to have lower foreign debt, we are increasing competitiveness. If the adjustment program was the right way, I'm not sure. But the fact is that Portuguese competitiveness has increased. I wasn't talking about Portugal. The proximity indicator is something that has a role in terms of proximity. General, it would be interesting to ask the Portuguese people if they have benefited from what the professor has mentioned, that we are benefiting or not, or not. Last two speakers. My question is about globalization. Given that globalization is considered as a progressive approach to the world, and we need more space from a social and economic point of view and in terms of knowledge. However, our geographic area is still made up of nation-states. Do you think that in the future there will be a major conflict between nation-states or groups of nation-states, like the EU or independent movements like Scotland and Catalonia, which are opposite movements to this trend? This idea of self-determination is a fundamental issue, which is also part of Europe. Scotland, or the Great Britain, found its way, and at the moment Spain is trying to find the way forward. Yesterday, Michael Ignatieff mentioned that. And Michael Ignatieff said, and I agree with what he said, and it's interesting to repeat that when a people is oppressed and suffers violence, they must have a right to self-determination. And in Europe, with different cultural, political, and economic areas, with the right to peace, the right to development, we have to question what interests there might be and the reasons underlying this ambition of self-determination, even from an administrative point of view and of national identity. But that right exists. I believe that those rights are not, those flows are not necessarily in contradiction. At a time of globalization, these proximity or self-determination, which is an old concept in terms of international policy, or cooperation, of coming together and making up not only intergovernmental units, but also intra- and trans-governmental units, are very important and will happen simultaneously and will dovetail. It's possible with globalization. In this world of flexible borders, during our lifetime, we will witness the flows of these two trends, both outgoing and incoming. Last question. Globalization and freedom. And have we gone too far? Maybe we should have more globalization. And Monica Diaz talked about our responsibility, which is a way in which we can react to these events, and we can't be passive. To what extent aren't we interfering in the freedom of those cultures that want to maintain their identity and their cultural heritage? In terms of cultural identity, who I am, to what extent does this globalization take us to too much homogeneity and interferes in the freedom of the third party? Kind of cultural colonization. Now, that question between universalism and community-centered approach is very difficult in international policy, but also it's an ethical problem. It's a question of law, which is difficult to answer. But there's one element missing in your question. The individual, you talked about communities, you talked about European or Western values, but you didn't talk about individuals. In my point of view, when we travel around the world, we find that a woman in India or a youngster in Kenya or somebody in Chile or in Alaska can have exactly the same dreams and the same ambitions, i.e. of speaking freely, of believing in any religion that they want, and to have the same opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of sending their children to school, and of being living in a world of peace, far from conflict. Are there more common things that join the people of the world together, or are there more things that divide us? I have my own answer. Chile already belongs to the OCDE. You should give the example of the other two and Chile. You're provoking me. So open globalization was a rhetoric question. Does globalization lead to freedom? And the answer is that globalization leads to freedom, bringing together people in a community of peace, sharing, monitoring mechanisms like the OCDE. What is the significance of the word globalization and freedom? Maybe globalization is just a means, a tool for freedom, because freedom is something not finished. It has to be nourished, encouraged. Freedom is accountable and is powerful. Globalization is a road, a motorway, without exits. Globalization has brought people together, but has made people drift. It's more difficult to be free today than it was 100 years ago, because now we know, and the fact that we know makes us responsible for our actions. Globalization leads to freedom, or is that something which doesn't hold water? We are in a world war? Maybe not, but the world is at war. Through new technologies, we can have globalization of fear. Globalization releases or threatens? Have we gone too far? Or does it allow for hope and the individual? We can't become slaves of illusion of freedom. Can a country be free if its people is not free? It looks like a sentence from our revolution, the 25th of April. We talked about several examples. Portuguese-speaking countries. I was a member of the army, so when I speak, I would like to congratulate the general with us. There's no developed country which isn't globalized, and not a globalized which isn't developed. What about Europe and Portugal in Europe? Do we have more freedom in Europe? What we are facing is increased globalization. Globalization are all of us. Thank you.